June 5, 1944, the night before the largest amphibious invasion in human history. A British corporal walked into a dimly lit pub somewhere in the southeast of England, ordered a pint, chatted with locals about football and the weather, and then left. 20 minutes later, the publican discovered something curious on the worn wooden bench. A buff-colored identity card bearing military insignia, a photograph, and unit markings for a division that, unbeknownst to anyone in that pub, did not exist. This was not carelessness. This was warfare of the most cunning kind, a single thread in an elaborate tapestry of deception that would determine whether thousands of young men lived or died on the beaches of Normandy, and whether Nazi Germany would be defeated or would successfully repel the greatest invasion force ever assembled. The story of how British soldiers deliberately lost identity cards in pubs, train stations, and public houses across Britain is the story of Operation Fortitude, the most successful strategic deception campaign in military history, and it begins not with generals in war rooms, but with a fundamental problem that threatened to doom the Allied invasion before a single soldier set foot in France. By early 1944, the Allies faced a mathematical nightmare that kept Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower awake at night. General Bernard Montgomery, commanding the Allied landing forces, had only 37 divisions at his disposal to launch the invasion of France. Across the Channel, the German Wehrmacht had positioned approximately 60 divisions to defend Fortress Europe, with particular concentration along the most logical invasion route, the Pas de Calais, where the English Channel narrowed to a mere 21 miles. The Germans held every advantage: interior lines of communication, established defenses, knowledge of the terrain, and the ability to move reserves rapidly to any threatened point. Simple arithmetic suggested that if the Germans could mass their forces at the actual invasion site within the first critical days, they could drive the Allies back into the sea, just as they had nearly done at Anzio months earlier. The human cost of this disparity was staggering. Allied planners estimated that without some means of dividing German attention and delaying their reserves, casualties on the invasion beaches could exceed 50%. Young men from Nebraska and Yorkshire, Quebec and Cape Town would die by the thousands in the surf, cut down by machine guns firing from fortified positions they could never hope to assault successfully. The English Channel would run red with Allied blood, and the liberation of Europe would be postponed indefinitely, if it could be attempted again at all. Winston Churchill, haunted by memories of the Gallipoli disaster from the First World War, understood viscerally what failure would mean. Nazi Germany would have time to perfect its V-weapons, potentially develop atomic weapons, and consolidate its grip on the continent. The entire outcome of the war hung on solving one seemingly impossible problem: how to make the Germans believe the Allies had twice as many divisions as actually existed, and how to convince them that the main invasion would strike anywhere except where it was actually planned. Into this desperate situation stepped an unlikely savior, not a general or admiral, but a 45-year-old lieutenant colonel named Dudley Wrangell Clark, who had spent the previous 3 years in Cairo pioneering an entirely new form of warfare. Clark was an unconventional officer who understood that, in modern war, perception could be as important as reality. While serving as personal intelligence officer to General Archibald Wavell in the Middle East, Clark had begun experimenting with strategic deception on a scale never before attempted. He created entire fictional military formations, divisions, corps, even armies that existed only on paper and in the minds of enemy intelligence officers. Using a carefully orchestrated combination of fake radio traffic, dummy equipment, planted documents, and calculated leaks, Clark had convinced Italian and German intelligence that British forces in North Africa and the Middle East were 40% larger than they actually were. His methods were revolutionary. Clark understood that enemy intelligence services were like puzzle solvers, constantly gathering fragments of information and assembling them into a coherent picture. The key was not to hand them a complete false picture, which would arouse suspicion, but to scatter genuine-seeming fragments that they would assemble themselves into the picture the Allies wanted them to see. Clark called his organization a force, a deliberately vague name that suggested nothing of its true purpose. Working from an office at 6 Sharia Qasr al-Nil in Cairo, situated opposite the 6th Division headquarters and, peculiarly, below a brothel, Clark assembled a small team of specialists. Engineers who could create dummy tanks, wireless operators who could simulate the radio traffic of entire divisions, and intelligence officers skilled in the dark arts of spreading disinformation. When the Allies began planning for D-Day in late 1943, They turned to Clark's techniques, but on a scale that dwarfed anything attempted before. The plan, eventually codenamed Operation Bodyguard, was coordinated by the London Controlling Section, a secret department so sensitive that many senior British officials never learned of its existence during the war. Under the chairmanship of Lieutenant Colonel John Bevan, the LCS developed an overarching strategy. Convinced the Germans that the Allies would attack Norway, attack through the Mediterranean into the Balkans, and when they finally crossed the Channel, would strike at Pas de Calais rather than Normandy. The plan submitted by Noel Wild, who headed the Ops B Deception Section at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, was ambitious but in the eyes of one man, fatally flawed. That man was Colonel David Strangeways, head of our force, Montgomery's Tactical Deception Staff. Strangeways had served under Clark in Cairo and had absorbed his mentor's central principle. Effective deception must force the enemy to do something, not merely believe something. In a dramatic confrontation in February 1944, Strangeways tore up Wild's plan in front of the assembled deception staff, declared it useless, and announced he would rewrite it from scratch. The established intelligence officers were aghast, but Strangeways had Montgomery's complete backing, and Montgomery answered only to Eisenhower. What Strangeways produced was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation that would come to be known as Operation Fortitude South, and at its heart was a fictional army that would become more real to German intelligence than many actual formations. The first United States Army group, FUSAG, already existed as an administrative shell that the Germans had detected through radio intercepts. Strangeways proposed filling this shell with a mixture of real and notional formations, creating on paper an entire army group of 50 divisions based in southeast England, poised to strike across the narrowest point of the Channel directly at Pas de Calais. To command this phantom army, Strangeways insisted on appointing the one Allied general the Germans feared above all others, Lieutenant General George S. Patton. The Germans' respect for Patton bordered on obsession. They considered him the finest battlefield commander the Allies possessed, aggressive, unpredictable, and tactically brilliant. German intelligence officers assumed, with Teutonic logic, that Eisenhower would never waste such a weapon on a diversionary attack. Wherever Patton was, there the main Allied effort must be. The Allies exploited this belief ruthlessly. Patton was photographed touring the fake FUSAG camps in Kent and Suffolk. He attended diplomatic functions. He delivered speeches. Every public appearance was calculated to reinforce the impression that southeast England hosted the primary invasion force. But the true genius of Strangeways' plan lay not in the grand strokes but in the meticulously orchestrated details. And this is where those lost identity cards enter the story as weapons of war. The challenge facing the deceivers was one of credibility. German intelligence, while it had been fooled before, was not staffed by fools. The Abwehr and the Sicherheitsdienst employed thousands of analysts who cross-referenced every piece of information, looking for contradictions and inconsistencies. If the Allies simply announced the existence of FUSAG and its subordinate divisions, German intelligence would instantly become suspicious. The deception had to be built from the bottom up, fragment by fragment, allowing the Germans to discover the truth for themselves. Here, Clark's Cairo techniques were refined to perfection for the European theater. British intelligence manufactured identity cards, passes, and official documents for soldiers in fictional divisions: the 5th Armored Division with its Blue Lobster insignia, the 2nd Airborne Division, the 7 Corps. These were not crude forgeries but perfect replicas of genuine military documentation, complete with authentic stamps, signatures, and serial numbers. They contained details about fictional units stationed at real locations, genuine sounding orders to report to actual barracks, and all the bureaucratic detritus that accumulates in any military organization. Then came the deliberately orchestrated carelessness. Soldiers were instructed to wear uniforms bearing the insignia of notional divisions and to visit pubs, cafes, and train stations in areas where foreign diplomats from neutral countries were known to frequent. These soldiers would talk, not indiscreetly, but with the kind of casual conversation that soldiers everywhere engage in. Complaints about training, speculation about where their unit might be sent, gossip about which divisions were arriving from America. And they would lose things. An identity card left on a pub bench. A pass forgotten in a telephone box. Orders that accidentally fell from a briefcase on a crowded train platform. British intelligence knew that German espionage networks, while compromised in Britain itself, remained active in neutral countries, particularly Spain, Portugal, Turkey, and Sweden. Documents that made their way into the hands of diplomats from these nations would eventually, through various channels both witting and unwitting, reach the desks of German intelligence analysts in Berlin. What made this method so effective was its apparent authenticity. A carefully planned leak through diplomatic channels might arouse suspicion. Why would the British allow such sensitive information to reach potential enemy ears? But a document that appeared to have been genuinely lost by a careless soldier, found by chance and reported through irregular channels, carried the ring of truth. The post office was weaponized as well. Postal censors, who examined all mail leaving Britain under wartime regulations, would occasionally allow letters to slip through that mentioned unit insignia, described seeing particular divisions in certain locations, or contained apparently innocent details that German intelligence could piece together. Christmas party invitations for fictional corps headquarters were leaked to Axis agents in Spain and Turkey. What could be more genuinely mundane than social correspondence? The identity card scheme was part of a vast, orchestrated symphony of deception that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. Wireless operators transmitted thousands of fake radio messages, creating the electronic signature of entire armies moving through southern England. Royal engineers constructed dummy landing craft, nicknamed Big Bobs, made from wood and canvas, moored at embarkation points in Kent and East Anglia where German reconnaissance might photograph them. Entire fake supply dumps appeared overnight. Road signs directing traffic to fictional unit headquarters were erected in populated areas. Genuine military formations were carefully hidden in southwest England where German intelligence had few sources, while in southeast England, where diplomats and potential informants were more numerous, every visible unit bore the insignia of FUSAG. But Clark and Strangeways understood that physical deception alone would not suffice, particularly because by 1944 the Germans could no longer fly reconnaissance aircraft over England with any regularity. The Royal Air Force's supremacy was nearly absolute. The deception would live or die based on human intelligence. And here the British held a secret advantage so profound that knowledge of it remained classified for 30 years after the war's end. By 1944, MI5, the British Security Service, had accomplished something unprecedented in the history of espionage. They had captured, turned, or controlled every single German agent operating in the United Kingdom. Through what became known as the double-cross system, coordinated by the 20 Committee under John Cecil Masterman, German agents who had been sent to Britain were given a choice: work for the British or face execution as spies. Most chose to live. Some did so enthusiastically. These double agents, with codenames like Garbo, Brutus, and Tricycle, became the primary channel through which German intelligence received information about Allied forces in Britain, information that British intelligence carefully scripted to support the Fortitude deception. The most important of these double agents was a Spanish national named Juan Pujol Garcia, who had volunteered to spy for the Germans and was given the codename Alaric by the Abwehr. British intelligence, recognizing his potential, gave him the codename Garbo after the actress, because his performances were so convincing. Pujol was an unlikely spy. He had failed as a student, businessman, cinema proprietor, and soldier. His marriage was falling apart. But he possessed two qualities that made him invaluable: an extraordinary imagination and an absolute hatred of fascism. Working with his handler, the brilliant MI5 officer Thomas Harris, Pujol created a fictional network of 27 subagents spread across Britain. A Venezuelan student in Glasgow, a Welsh seaman in Liverpool, a Portuguese commercial traveler in the Midlands. None of these agents existed, but German intelligence believed in them utterly. During the first 6 months of 1944, Pujol sent more than 500 messages to his Abwehr handlers in Madrid, each marked urgent, describing troop movements, new units arriving from America, and the massive buildup of FUSAG in southeast England. The genius of Pujol's reports was their mixture of truth and fiction. He would report genuine military formations in accurate locations, information the British deliberately fed him, knowing it would enhance his credibility, mixed with reports of fictional divisions that did not exist. The British could verify that the deception was working because they possessed another secret weapon that would not be revealed until decades after the war. They had broken the German Enigma cipher system at Bletchley Park. Through ultra-intelligence, British codebreakers could read encrypted German military communications, including the Abwehr's reports to the German High Command and OKW's assessments of Allied strength. This created a closed feedback loop of remarkable precision. Pujol would send false information to his German handlers. British intelligence would intercept the German response through ultra-decrypts, verify that the deception had been believed, and then calibrate the next round of false information accordingly. As D-Day approached, the pressure on the deception staff became unbearable. Everything had to be perfect. A single mistake, one contradiction that German analysts might catch, could unravel the entire operation and doom the invasion. The plan called for Pujol to send a warning to his German handlers on the night of June 5th to 6th that the invasion was beginning, but the timing had to be exquisite. Send it too early and the Germans might rush reinforcements to Normandy before the landings. Send it too late and Pujol's credibility would be destroyed. Harris and his superiors agonized over the decision for weeks. In the end, they decided Pujol would send his warning at 3 a.m. on June 6th, approximately 4 hours before the seaborne landings would begin but after the airborne drops had already started. By the time the message was decoded, translated, and reached German commanders who could act on it, the Allied troops would already be hitting the beaches. The Germans would conclude that Pujol had tried to warn them but the message arrived too late. Not through any fault of his, but because of bureaucratic delays in the German system itself. His credibility would remain intact for the crucial second phase of the deception. But to understand why this mattered so much, we must shift perspective and examine the fatal blind spot that afflicted German intelligence and the German High Command, a combination of doctrine, experience, and arrogance that made them particularly susceptible to the very deception the Allies were orchestrating. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who commanded Army Group B defending northern France, understood the realities of Allied material superiority with brutal clarity. He told his officers, "The war will be won or lost on the beaches. We'll have only one chance to stop the enemy and that's while he's in the water, struggling to get ashore. The first 24 hours of the invasion will be decisive." Rommel knew that once the Allies established a beachhead and brought their overwhelming air power and artillery to bear, the Germans would be unable to dislodge them. He advocated placing German armored reserves as close to the coast as possible so they could counterattack immediately. But Rommel's superior, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of OB West, disagreed. Von Rundstedt represented the traditional Prussian military doctrine. Keep mobile reserves concentrated inland, determine where the enemy's main effort is developing, and then commit them in a decisive counterstroke. The disagreement between these two strategic philosophies paralyzed German decision-making and created exactly the confusion the Allies needed. More crucially, German intelligence had developed a deeply flawed assessment of Allied capabilities that played directly into Operation Fortitude's hands. On May 8, 1944, von Rundstedt's staff produced an appreciation that estimated the Allies could employ at least 20 and probably more divisions in first wave must be expected, with strong air landing forces. German analysts, working from the fragments of information reaching them through diplomatic channels, captured documents, and radio intercepts, many of which had been carefully planted by British intelligence, had concluded that the Allies possessed approximately 90 divisions in Britain, nearly double the actual number. This overestimation had profound strategic consequences. If the Allies possessed 90 divisions, then an invasion force of 20 to 30 divisions hitting Normandy could indeed be a diversion. The main force, presumably Patton's FUSAG with its supposed 50 divisions, must still be waiting in England to strike the real target. And where would that target be?
Simple géographie suggested Pas de Calais.
It was the shortest channel crossing, meaning the Allies could maximize their air cover and minimize the time their invasion fleet was vulnerable. It offered the most direct route into the industrial heartland of the Ruhr, Germany's economic jugular. It was exactly where German military doctrine would choose to strike. The German High Command's conviction that Pas de Calais represented the primary target became almost an article of faith. Hitler himself, usually paranoid about deception, convinced himself through his own strategic reasoning that the Allies would strike at Calais. On June 1, 1944, the Japanese ambassador to Berlin, Hiroshi Oshima, met with Hitler to discuss Allied invasion plans. Ultra-intercepts of Oshima's subsequent report to Tokyo revealed Hitler's thinking. "I think that diversionary actions will take place in a number of places, against Norway, Denmark, the southern part of western France, and the French Mediterranean coast. When asked where the main invasion would come, Hitler replied, "Across the Strait of Dover." The carefully planted identity cards and documents, the sightings of fictional unit insignia, the fake radio traffic, Patton's public appearances. All these fragments had assembled themselves in German minds into a coherent picture that was completely false. The deception had not merely succeeded, it had become self-reinforcing. German intelligence believed what they had discovered through their own efforts, making them all the more certain of its truth. When Allied forces stormed ashore on the beaches of Normandy on the morning of June 6, 1944, the German response was catastrophic for Germany. That is, the initial reactions ranged from confusion to outright denial. Rommel was in Germany, visiting his wife for her birthday. Many senior commanders were away from their posts, attending a war game exercise. The terrible weather that had made Eisenhower's decision to launch the invasion so fraught had convinced German meteorologists that an invasion was impossible. When reports came in of airborne landings and then beach assaults, German officers struggled to determine if this was the real invasion or a diversion. Most critically, the 15th Army, 15 divisions including several panzer units, remained frozen in place around Pas de Calais, waiting for Patton's phantom FUSAG to launch the real invasion. General Hans von Salmuth, commanding 15th Army, received reports of the Normandy landings, but his standing orders, based on the intelligence picture German High Command had developed, were to remain ready to repel the main invasion at Calais. He kept his forces in position. At Hitler's headquarters, the Führer himself was asleep when the landings began. His staff feared to wake him with news that might prove to be merely another false alarm. When Hitler finally received the reports, his initial reaction supported the Allied deception perfectly. He believed Normandy was a feint and ordered that reserves should not be committed hastily. The decisive battle would come at Calais, and Germany must not weaken that sector by rushing reinforcements to what was obviously a diversionary attack. This is when Juan Pujol Garcia, Agent Garbo, delivered his masterstroke, the message that would earn him both an Iron Cross from Germany and an MBE from Britain. On June 9, 3 days after D-Day, as Hitler and his generals debated whether Normandy was the real invasion and whether to commit the strategic reserves, Pujol sent an urgent message to his Abwehr handlers. It was long, detailed, and emphatic. He reported that his network of subagents across southeast England was observing no reduction in FUSAG's strength. The divisions were still in position. Patton was still in command. The invasion preparations around Dover and Kent appeared unchanged. His conclusion: Normandy was absolutely a diversionary attack. The main invasion against Pas de Calais was still coming. The message reached German High Command at precisely the moment when panzer divisions were literally on the road, heading toward Normandy. Several divisions were within striking distance of the beachhead, where Allied forces were still desperately vulnerable. Hitler read Garbo's report. He consulted with his staff, and then he issued an order that changed the course of history. Turn the panzers around. Keep them in reserve. The real invasion has not yet begun. For 14 critical days, the period that Allied planners had identified as essential for establishing an unbreakable lodgment, the German 15th Army remained at Pas de Calais, waiting for an invasion that would never come. The delay allowed Allied forces to expand and consolidate the Normandy beachhead, land reinforcements, secure the artificial Mulberry harbors, and prepare for the breakout that would eventually come at Operation Cobra. The divisions that could have counterattacked the vulnerable beachhead in the first week of June, when such an attack might have succeeded, arrived in July, when the Allied position had become unassailable. The full extent of Operation Fortitude's success only became apparent when Allied intelligence decrypted German communications through Ultra. The intercepts revealed that German intelligence continued to believe in FUSAG's existence and threatening posture not just through June, but into July and August. Even after Patton was publicly identified as commanding the Third Army in Normandy in late July, which should have shattered the deception, German intelligence convinced themselves that Patton had been demoted or that FUSAG had been reorganized, but that the threat to Pas de Calais remained real. The strategic impact was measurable in divisions and lives. The 15 divisions of 15th Army, held at Pas de Calais until July, represented approximately 150,000 combat troops who could have reinforced Normandy during the critical first weeks. Had those divisions been committed to counterattack in the first 48 hours after D-Day, when Allied forces were at their most vulnerable, the casualties and the outcome could have been dramatically different. On D-Day itself, approximately 4,000 Allied troops died and over 5,000 were wounded or missing. Terrible losses, but far fewer than the apocalyptic casualties planners had feared. By preventing the concentration of German reserves in Normandy, Operation Fortitude arguably saved tens of thousands of Allied lives and ensured the invasion's success. The deception also had cascading effects beyond Normandy. German forces that might have been available for the Eastern Front remained tied down in Western Europe, waiting to repel invasions that would never come. 13 German divisions stationed in Norway throughout 1944, positioned there because of Operation Fortitude North, the companion deception suggesting an Allied invasion of Scandinavia, never participated in the crucial battles in France or Russia. The identity cards lost in pubs were never going to win the war by themselves. No single element of Operation Fortitude could have succeeded in isolation. But as components of an interlocking system of deception, physical fakery, electronic simulation, and human intelligence working in perfect coordination, they represented a new kind of warfare where perception could be as decisive as armored divisions. Clark's insight from Cairo had been vindicated on the largest possible stage. In modern war, making the enemy believe something could be as important as the reality itself. After the war, German intelligence officers captured by the Allies were shown maps they had created of Allied forces in Britain before D-Day. These maps, based on all the intelligence they had gathered, including reports from agents, diplomatic leaks, and documents like those identity cards found in pubs, showed fictional divisions in locations they had never occupied, phantom armies that had never existed, and a completely false order of battle. General Alfred Jodl, when interrogated, confirmed that German high command had expected major landings in southern France because of the large concentration of forces they believed had been built up in North Africa. Another layer of the Fortitude deception. The human stories behind the deception have a poignant quality. The soldiers who wore fictional unit insignia and deliberately lost identity cards in pubs were playing a dangerous game. If captured, they would have faced execution as spies rather than treatment as prisoners of war. The double agents lived under constant strain, knowing that one slip, one inconsistency in their reports, could reveal them to their German handlers with fatal consequences. Pujol Garcia, after receiving his German Iron Cross by mail, requested permission from his British handlers to destroy it. He could not bear to keep it. The legacy of Operation Fortitude extended far beyond June 1944. The techniques pioneered by Clark in Cairo and refined by Strangeways and the London Controlling Section established principles of strategic deception that remain relevant today. Modern military doctrine recognizes that in an age of satellite reconnaissance, electronic surveillance, and instant communications, deception has become more difficult but also more necessary. The basic principle remains unchanged. Force your enemy to make decisions based on a false understanding of reality, and you can achieve strategic effects without firing a shot. The story of those lost identity cards also reminds us that war is fought on many levels simultaneously. While generals planned and soldiers trained, intelligence officers waged a parallel war in the shadows. A war of perception and deception where the weapons were carefully constructed lies and the battlefield was the enemy's mind. In this invisible war, a corporal leaving an identity card on a pub bench was as much a combatant as a paratrooper dropping behind enemy lines, and potentially just as crucial to victory.